The world is evolving at a faster pace than ever before, and as we begin the path to recovery after worldwide disruption, this podcast explores how the design industries can adapt to changing expectations and create a better future for both your businesses and your consumers. I'm Bethan Ryder, Executive Editorial Director here at WGSN, and I'm your host this week. You're listening to Create Tomorrow, the WGSN podcast. Welcome to today's episode of the Create Tomorrow podcast, in which we'll be discussing the future of social robots. Here at WGSN, we've been tracking the growth of robotics, a global market that, according to consultancy firm Frost and Sullivan, will reach $38.3 billion by 2024. What's more, the global adoption rate of robotics and automation in digital supply chains is set to increase from 39% in 2020 to 73% in 2025. And Gartner predicts that by 2025, at least 2 out of the top 10 global retailers will form robot resource organisations to manage non-human workers. During the pandemic, robots moved from manufacturing lines to service roles. In China, the need for touch-free services has given the unmanned economy a significant boost, and sales of robots are growing at more than twice the rate of global trajectories. Previously mute and brute, robots now have roles worldwide as restaurant servers, hotel clerks, and even therapists. What's more, consumer trust in robots overall is growing as they become mainstream. A global study in 2020 by Oracle and HR firm Workplace Intelligence found that 82% of people believe robots can support their mental health better than humans. So it's a new robotic world. To discuss these topics, I'm really excited to welcome Carla Diana, US designer, author and educator, who's just published a fantastic handbook to anyone engaged in consumer tech design. It's called My Robot Gets Me, How Social Design Can Make New Products More Human, and it's published by Harvard Business Review Press. Hi Carla, welcome to the podcast. Where are you calling in from today?
Hello Bethan, thanks for having me. I am calling in from Bloomfield Hills, Michigan, on the campus of the Cranbrook Academy of Art, and we are just outside Detroit.
And to discuss this from a WGSN perspective, we have our head of the brand new consumer tech platform, Sarah Housley. Hello, Sarah.
Hi, Bethan. How are you?
I'm good. I'm really excited about this book, Carla, which I've read about half of, and I think Sarah has. I haven't quite finished it. But I just wanted to hear a little bit briefly for our audience, really, about your background, because I know you've designed, you've also taught, and sort of why this book is a culmination, if you like, of your career.
So my original degree in undergraduate was in mechanical engineering, mostly just because I knew I wanted to make things and I didn't know that industrial design and product design existed. And then, as I worked as an engineer, I realized that there was so much work involved in thinking about the human and emotional side of what we create that I went back to school to get a master's in product design. And during that time, had this light bulb moment when I realized that physical things and digital things were going to come together. So I've pretty much focused my career on being a designer that focuses on physical things that have some kind of electronic components.
What's exciting to me about the book is that you kind of, people are so sort of put off by the robotic idea, but in a way you're humanizing robotics. And I know that, Sarah, we've been tracking this at WGSN, right, that there's this huge growth and it's going to get even more over the next 5 years. It's sort of been accelerated. You've written about friendly tech a bit. What have you been seeing from our perspective?
Yeah, so on the consumer-facing side, we've been talking a lot at WGSN about moving from high-tech to shy-tech, so much softer, more discreet, friendly-looking design for the robot-like products that exist within the home now, like the Google Nest and all of Amazon's Alexa products. Brands are doing this really purposefully to make them fit into the home more comfortably and to start to make consumers more comfortable with this abstract idea of living with robots. And I think that design direction is really important for building that trust that we talked about. Consumer trust in robots is growing, but they're also becoming more useful to our everyday lives. So we see a lot of drivers that are making them more important to consumers at the moment.
I think what's what I like about the book, Carla, is the way you've broken it down into these sort of 5 pillars: presence, expression, interaction, context, and ecosystem. So with the presence, that's very much what a product looks like, right? So I just wondered if you felt, Carly, obviously your area is tech, but clearly presence is something that extends to every product, right? It's not just tech, really. Can you talk a little bit about how you define presence in the context of your book?
Presence is really a lot of the, in a sense, the poetics of product design. People are used to thinking about colors in terms of emotional cues, but every aspect of design has that, from the form that it is, the materials, and something can look aggressive, or it can look humble, or it can look authoritative. And I would even go so far as to saying that I think it would be wise for brands to actually, just like we do typographic or logo guidelines, to even do kind of a form guideline. I mean, it's funny that you mentioned, not only tech. I actually feel like in some ways tech is the most challenge in this area, because electronics have become so miniaturized that we can have something with so much capability that's just in some kind, like almost even invisibly hidden in our walls. And even though that's possible, sometimes that's actually a disservice, because the product itself doesn't have a role in our physical lives in a way that it might need to.
I think there's an interesting example, I think it's in this section in the book, where you talk about, as Sarah just touched on, this kind of softening of tech, which has been happening. And if I think about like Nest as a brand, like there's very much that those forms come through for that brand. And you talk about the home camera and how they removed, if you could talk a little bit about that, because I love the way that in a way that went from an authoritarian looking object to a friendly one.
Yeah, so one of the things I enjoyed about the process of the book is that I do have interviews with several designers and other professionals working on these types of products. And one of those people was Rocky Jacob, who had been the head of design for Nest. And he described working on an outdoor camera. And typically, we'd only seen outdoor cameras as security cameras. But Nest was envisioning this as a home camera. Maybe it's to help you see if a package has landed on your doorstep, or it can become part of your doorbell for when your friend is there to visit, and not necessarily out of this kind of like fear of needing it for some kind of crime. And this is, I really love the story because it sort of describes the back and forth between team members in a product design process. And he says when, the first designs were sketched, they looked just like every other security camera. And what he felt like was a defining feature was the shield that goes over the lens, which obviously has very practical uses. But from a presence or form semantics point of view, he felt that made it look like a police hat. And so he really worked hard with the whole team to see if they could eliminate that hat and soften the look and make the lens just more prominent rather than sort of hidden under this shield. And, even though that might just seem like a small detail, it actually really defines the character of the product.
What other things have you been noticing, Sarah, in this space of the kind of the form, if you like, and the direction that robotics are going towards as well?
I think there's something really interesting in the shapes that are being used. So Carla speaks in her book about how we perceive shape and the movement of shapes. And Bethan and I both really love the flour sack experiment, Carla, where you get your design students to animate how a flour sack might stand. It might soften its corners if it's embarrassed. It might kind of huddle if it's feeling shy. So those round shapes are kind of universally seen as really unthreatening. And they're also kind of cartoon charactery. And I know that some of the robotics companies, they assemble really cross-disciplinary teams. They have psychologists, they have designers, but they also have things like children's book illustrators who are really good at drawing friendly characters. And they have animators from companies like Pixar and Jim Henson who are really good at designing characters. So I think that the design language is so rich within robotics, which I think is so interesting.
I'd love to move on now to expression, because I feel like that's where this starts being dynamic. And you have 3 modalities, right, Carla, that you sketch out in your book.
So the book has, and what I love that you're referring to are the pillars, and the way that they're illustrated in the book. It's almost like an onion with concentric circles that build, where presence is actually at the core. And every product, even the water bottle I'm looking at has presence. And then, beyond that, the next level up would be expression. And what I talk about are light, sound, and movement. And, we think about movement around motors and the way things are physically animated, and sound, of course. We've already talked about Siri and Alexa, but I think abstraction comes into all of those. And then light, and then light can be something as like I'm looking at an LED, one single point of light that's on my microphone. But when you start building lights, you can either have a strip of lights that then starts to tell you the strength of power or the direction of something, up to where once you start having a matrix, you get almost to a screen. But I'm very interested, and I work very hard with my students into not necessarily throwing screens onto every product, and seeing how we can use those other modalities to give us the needed messages without having to be completely literal about them.
And have you noticed, and I don't know, this is maybe one for Sarah, that as we've all become more tech savvy, and certainly over the pandemic, people had to get to know what Zoom was and all these other aspects of tech in our lives, have those hints of what a device is doing become more sophisticated too? Can you actually do it with very small things? And have you noticed that it's become more discreet, Sarah, in the kind of friendly tech?
Well, there have been a number of advances from all of the home assistants over the past year. I'm not sure it's directly related to the pandemic. I'm sure it was planned in their product roadmaps a long time ago, but they've all become much more subtle in their cues. So some of them now turn to face you so that they can keep tracking you as you talk, which is something a human or an animal or any kind of life form would do naturally. So that feels very intuitive to us. Some of them, if they know you're looking at the screen, if they can sense that you have your eyes on the screen, they'll zoom in on what the text is on the screen. So all of these user experience things are meant to feel more natural and meant to feel more like you're interacting with something that is intelligent, that has this ambient intelligence to it. And those are definitely making the interactions feel more comfortable, I think.
I love that bit in this section of the book where you talk about the magic moments that it's the title of the book, right? My robot gets me, and that sense that you're communicating with that robot, and how your son was sort of pre-verbal, but he could tell that the light that you'd put in his room, the LEDs, he could tell it was communicating something about time to wake up.
Right. Yeah. I was using a product called Nanoleaf that are these series of tiles. They're really exquisite. And they just kind of glow, and you can program them to glow different colors or to have colors that move along it. And he was in a room that didn't get great natural light. So I had put those in there. And it was this kind of, great moment that I had explained to him. I mean, he wasn't even one, I think, that when it's orange, that's time to wake up. And if it's not orange yet, I would say we still have to stay asleep. It was wonderful because once we had this shared language, I would be able to go in his room in the morning when he had woken up, and he would kind of raise his hands and point at the light and say, it's time to get up, and it was this really lovely moment.
Sarah and I were talking about voice and sound, and I'm sort of fascinated by the fact that some of these devices that serve us have had female voices. And I just wondered what you think about gender inclusivity in robots going forwards, and how, the male voice typically associated with authority. How do we think this is going to be challenged in the future, or how can we challenge it?
Oh, yeah, this is a really rich discussion, and it's something that I think about a lot. So one of the main projects that I talk about in the book is Moxie. That's a hospital robot for a company called Diligent Robotics. And we've been designing this robot that assists nurses. And, Moxie, I think originally I and the team had been feeling like there's a preponderance of women in the nursing field, and therefore it makes sense that Moxie would be female. But then we were always challenging that. We're feeling like, well, but we don't want to reinforce a bias, right? There are wonderful male nurses. So don't we want to contribute to that kind of inclusion? And then in addition to that, there is that other layer of, the robots are serving us. Like my colleague at Cornell Tech, Dr. Wendy Ju, she likes to say, when we're always having this philosophical conversation, what is a robot? And she says a robot is something that does things on our behalf, so essentially service. And when we look at things like Siri, Alexa, Cortana, Google Home Voice, there's a default to the female voice because we're used to assistants, right? And so, again, are we reinforcing those stereotypes by our choices, which are then reinforced by the choices that are given to us in the design process? And, and it goes beyond that. I mean, it goes to, I've given talks, like this question of gender comes up a lot. I've given talks and, there's this shiny white plastic that is kind of the language of high tech, right? The language of kind of like clean, new robot shell. And, I've been challenged by that, by people as well, around race, around like, why is it white, which is, again, something that I've thought about with a lot of my collaborators and, in some cases have done purposely these gray shells so that we're not touching on race in a way that we don't want to. But it comes down to the same question, like, whoa, if we have all of these characters around in the sense of these like social actors that are our robots and they're all white, like what is that saying? But on the other hand, if we purposely make one non-white, like what are the implications of that?
There was an amazing article years ago by a woman that was called "I Don't Date Men Who Shout at Alexa," which is if she went home with a man and he was rude to his home assistant, that date would just end there. And that provoked a lot of debate at the time, because it's also about, if we're shouting at these assistants, if we're using them as our servants, then the implications of the gender are just that much more troubling. So in the long run, I'd like to see robotics move in the same kind of direction as society in general. We talk a lot about at WGSN about gender inclusivity, non-binary ways of thinking. I think it should move in that direction because that is the direction that society is hopefully moving in. But Carla, you talk about needing the archetype as well, needing people to feel comfortable with something that is familiar. And we do put gender and to some extent race on absolutely everything as humans. So we do still need to confront these issues at the moment. So it's a really interesting area because there's so much potential for innovation. But I would always lean towards thinking of robots not as human or like human, but Kevin Kelly has this phrase, extra human. There's something different to humans. They're another type of species, they're another type of entity, and that's how we should think about them, in my opinion.
We haven't got much longer, so I want to whiz through the rest of our topics a little bit. I like this difference between service and companion robots. Do you see them always as separate entities, or do you think they'll merge? Because you talked about there being differences in the design process towards a service robot, like something that's doing your vacuum cleaner, versus something like a leak, which is a companion to look after if you're maybe an older person and with phone calls and all this kind of thing, like a personal assistant.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's really like a this or that. What I really have always felt as a designer of any kind of product is that design that understands its circumstance, that understands the context, understands the details of the use case scenario is necessarily going to be the strongest. Like you take something like a GoPro camera, and it was designed specifically for that use case. And I think the same goes for software products and robotics, and with a few exceptions, right? So I kind of think that we can certainly have, like, there's a product that I consulted on in its very early stages that's called Jibo, that has, is since no longer on the market, and it was aiming to be what I might call an everything device, right? Where the promotional video for the product showed it helping people do recipes, helping, kids read stories, helping the family take their, impromptu family photos, and, and a couple of other different use cases. And I think that, there's a lot to that as well. Like some of it is just whether or not we as people are ready for that, like conceptually, to think about this thing in a different way. I mean, I think a lot of design is kind of evolution, right? Like when we had the Google Glass, like the first ones, and we called them glass holes, it was because like it didn't evolve from eyeglasses. Now we see it, we see like, Amazon's got a pair, like Google's like it's building on the archetype of glasses that we're used to, and kind of slowly integrating into our lives rather than being this sort of quick new thing. I think Jibo was like a new thing that we hadn't defined. But then I also think that there can be a real strength in the design process, like I said, in having kind of a single-use thing. And I'm constantly debating this, right? Because I don't love seeing a lot of products cluttering our homes and cluttering our landfills. And certainly when we look at our tech giants, we see that they do the everything device pretty well. Like, I know that some of our recording is happening on, a mobile device, right? And that thing is a mobile device. It's a camera. Like the camera on my mobile is pretty darn fantastic right now. I don't carry around an SLR anymore. I don't. So, I think that there are everything devices, but that's a really challenging market to enter into.
The final part of your book is sort of ecosystems, and we wondered, Sarah and I were talking about the future of home automation, and we wondered what you see that, I mean, we kind of talked about it a bit now, but do you see that as a series, like an ecosystem of robots? Or Sarah, have you seen also like obviously we've got the vacuum cleaners and things like this, but what other things you see around the corner?
Well, there's some really interesting robots being developed at the Toyota Research Institute who are tackling this really challenging problem of grip and getting robots to hold things. And if they can crack grip, that will open up many, many more doors. So they're doing things like kitchen robots that can unload the dishwasher. And it is not a consumer product in any near-scale time frame, but it's fascinating to see the research happening there.
Yeah. I mean, it really gets you thinking about how sophisticated our experience is in a way that we don't even contemplate or think about. Like the number of decisions that go into, say, holding a glass or holding an egg, right? And understanding that it's an egg and understanding just how hard to hold it and not hold it. I mean, I think, this whole business of ecosystem and will there be an ecosystem of robots? I mean, it gets back to almost the philosophical question of like, what is a robot? Because certainly, there might be something like that grip, like perhaps that grip is integrated into a dishwasher, right? Like you could see that being a really real need and a practical application. But, we already have a lot of our products like that we wouldn't necessarily call robots, right? I mean, we have a tendency to think of robots as the things that are roving in our midst, or the things that can literally talk to us, like Siri and Alexa and Cortana. And I think that ecosystems, however, are important, will be important, and are going to be and are a mess right now, and will continue to be a mess. Because what happens is, like, even, the things that we've talked about today, I have, all kinds of stuff in my one room, the living room alone, let alone other rooms. And, what we have happening now is that they are necessarily dumbifying each other because they run on different protocols and they're not communicating with one another, right? And, a lot of that's a really, like, wicked problem because it involves the competition of different brands and different manufacturers who, ideally would work together on a unified protocol around it. I mean, we already have enough challenges with the Bluetooth connecting and finding the right Wi-Fi network and all of that. And then you have these kind of competing services that are necessarily closed to one another because it's in the business interest to get people to want an ecosystem that is all of one brand, right? So that's a whole really interesting and difficult challenge.
So we need to move to a metaverse for robots that could talk to each other, and then you could have whole smart cities, which I know they're being built anyway, but it's interesting. There needs to be more sharing and collaboration and open source. We haven't got a huge amount of time, but I know that Sarah was curious to hear what you thought about a new bot that's been launched. Sarah, do you want to?
Yeah, we couldn't record a podcast about robots right now and not talk about the Tesla bot. I wouldn't say it's a product that's being launched, but I'd love to hear your take on it, Carla.
So yeah, for anyone who's not familiar, was it just last week? Elon Musk announced on behalf of Tesla this robot. So, and the announcement was made not with a video of some, electromechanical thing, but a dancer in a white suit with a black, very elegant and very good dancer. And it was introduced as a vision for the future of a robot that would be kind of this everything device that I was just describing, right? That it might go help you get your groceries, it might cook your dinner, it might bring you a beer, it might go check the front door, like all those things. So it's sort of this everything device. Certainly we can laugh at it, but we do know that Elon Musk has been a force of remarkability that has actually delivered, right? Like people are driving around in Teslas. So the dancing part is kind of like, it's, hey, that's not a robot, that's a person, but it's a vision. Like as a designer, I appreciate a vision, right? And I appreciate that, like, yeah, I bet somebody like Elon Musk could guide a team to producing a humanoid robot that is that sophisticated. For me, my own design career and philosophy, I feel like the humanoid form is grossly misguided, right? Like to have actual limbs, to have the actual body. And I think it represents what I like to call human hubris, where we just feel like, well, we're the best design, aren't we? It's like, no, like, why does it need to have necessarily two arms? Like, why does it, maybe it has one form that is stabilizes an object and the other one that grabs an object. Like, why does it need to have a literal head or a face? Although this one had this sort of like really interesting sort of black hood but why does it need two limbs as opposed to, let's say, wheels? Like all of those questions, I think we just wind up leapfrogging to this humanoid place because it's what we know in our own myopic vision as human beings.
I was going to ask from both of you the most exciting advance that you're tracking in robotics, like a moonshot for the future.
So I'm really interested in what Disney Imagineering are doing because I think there's huge potential in robots in entertainment and really creative uses of robots in places like theme parks. And they are building a little baby Groot robot that can embody any of their characters eventually and can interact with the people at the theme parks in really naturalistic ways and almost create like a live movie. And I think that's really, really exciting to watch that develop.
Yeah, and I mean, from from my point of view, I see excitement just more in what I talk about in the chapter around context and around which, it's less exciting than something really new or different, but it's more like getting our existing robots to be better at being robots. And what I talk about is this idea that what's really challenging is context. Like, so there's a very famous example that a roboticist whose name is eluding me that I mentioned in the book talks about with so we've had these AI agents that were able to play the game Go, right? And like that was kind of a milestone in robotics. And as much as that is sophisticated and exciting, we can think about that robot. We think about that robot, the room could be burning and that robot would not notice. So is that really intelligent, right? And so the room burning, so that's where it comes into context. And I think that's where really sophistication, and someone like you or me, if we walked into a party, we would, before talking to somebody, read a million things about that person, right? Like, are they making eye contact? What's their stance? What's their emotional state? Like, I think, that's a really important, sophisticated thing that affects how you interact socially with someone. And the premise of the book is that our interaction with our devices is essentially a social interaction, or will happen best when it's a socially sophisticated interaction.
Thank you so much. It's been really fascinating, and I can't recommend the book enough. I can't wait to read the second half. Even though I'm not a tech designer, I found it really fascinating.
Yeah, good. I'm glad to hear that. I was hoping that I do really advocate technology product literacy for everyone. I think there's a lot that we need to be aware of because we're using this stuff and it's part of our lives. But thank you so much for having me. This was a real pleasure.
Thank you to Carla Diana and Sarah Housley for taking time to speak to us today. Carla's book, My Robot Gets Me, How Social Design Can Make New Products More Human, is out now, published by Harvard Business Review. If you're a WGSN subscriber, you'll find reports covering many of the issues we touched upon on our recently launched Consumer Tech platform, from Design Futures Life with Robots to our key trend report, Friendly Technology. If you want to find out how to subscribe, head over to WGSN.com to discover how you can get access to our service. We're constantly publishing new content focusing on how we can design a brighter, better future for our industries, including food and drink, interiors, beauty, fashion, and consumer tech. You can subscribe to the show on all major podcast platforms, and if you like what you've heard, why not leave us a rating and review on iTunes? I'd also like to thank our podcast producer, Roland Bodenham. We'll be back in 2 weeks for our next episode, so until then, stay well and healthy, and we'll see you next time.